to give us our whole pack Bible recap. We just had Bible study on Monday, and it was an awesome time. We are beginning our new study on the book of Exodus. And so, before we took off into diving into that study, I wanted to give us first an overview of the book of Exodus. And so, what we did was we took a look at what was going on in Exodus, how it was broken down, who wrote it, all those important things. And then we correlated some of the things that were going on in the book of Exodus um, to us personally, and how we all each have our own Exodus experience. And so, we talked about how the book of Exodus, first of all, it means that word Exodus means outgoing or the way out. And so we're coming up at the end of 2020. It's now November. And so we're coming out of 2020 and we're headed towards 2021. And so it's no coincidence that we're doing this study of Exodus just as well as we just finished up our refill talk on relationship. And at the end of that conversation, we were talking about how do we know when it's time to exit or to leave a relationship. And so we ended with that. We're at the end of the year. And so I know that we're all excited about 2020 getting out the door. But at the same time, there's some things that we need to be mindful of as we're exiting 2020. That we need to leave some things behind us, to exit some things, and that we don't need to take those things into 2021. And so Exodus is the outgoing and the way out. It's a book of deliverance. It's a book that shares with us the story of how God delivered his people from bondage. And we talked about how they were in bondage for 430 years. And that's a long time to be in bondage to anything. 30 days is long, but 430 years is a long time. And so God's people were in bondage and slavery for 430 years. And we talked about how one of the important elements of the book of Exodus is that God allowed Moses to be born during this time. We talked about Moses' birth. We talked about the call of Moses. And we even talked about how Moses, in realizing that God's people, well, his people as well, because by that time he knew that the Hebrews were his people as well, how he committed murder because of the anger he felt in regards to seeing his people in slavery, and that murder caused him to exit Egypt for a time. And in that time, God called him to be the deliverer that God would use to deliver the people from bondage. The interesting thing about that is Moses was angry before he left Egypt and committed murder. But when God called him, he did not immediately answer yes. In fact, he made excuses. And we talked about how we are quick to make excuses about things when we are knowing that we need to exit a situation, or there's a situation that we need to deal with, because these were Moses's people, and God wanted to use him to be an instrument to provide deliverance. But Moses was not with that at first, and so he had all these excuses as to why he could not be the tool that God would use to deliver the people. And that correlated to us in our own personal life. We make excuses as to why we need to stay in a situation, why we can't leave, why it's not financially a good place for us. We've been on this job for 15 million years and it's just not a good time right now. Whatever the excuse is, we make excuses as to why we cannot exit our own situation. And so we talked about that briefly. We also talked about how when Moses returned to the land of Egypt finally, that he asked Pharaoh, as God commanded him to do so, to let the people go. And so we talked about how Pharaoh did not want to let the people go. And so time after time, Moses approached him and asked, and he would not. And every time he denied and would not let the people go, there was a plague that was sent on the land. And so one of your homework assignments out of this wound up being, well, first, let's go back to the birth of Moses. The first assignment was, who were the parents of Moses? And so now we're at the plagues. And so all of those plagues were very significant. God just didn't randomly choose stuff. And so your homework assignment with that was to find out what was the representation, or what was the meaning behind the types of plagues that God sent, because they all um, were significant for one reason or another. And so that was your homework assignment. And so we talked about those plagues, but we also talked about how in our own personal lives, it seems like we have to go through plague like situations in our own personal life for us to even want to exit something. It has to get real bad. We have to maybe go through sickness. We have to go through a loss of a job, a financial distress, or some means of plague like situation to cause us to finally say, I throw up my hands, I just want to get out because this is not working for me. Although we knew that it was not, has not been working all the time beforehand. So sometimes God provides us with plague-like situations in order to get us to a place where we'll just come to a place of surrender. And so we talked about that a little bit. And we also talked about how finally, when Pharaoh did let them go, he still was at a place, even after all the plagues, even after the final plague of the death of the firstborn sons in Egypt, he still was not ready to let go. And so we talked about how when the Israelites were ready and they went and left and crossed the Red Sea, and how Pharaoh sent his army behind him, behind them, and that he still was not ready to let go. And so in the midst of him not being ready to let go, Pharaoh's whole army was killed because they were all drowned in the Red Sea. And we talked about how sometimes when we're not in a place of letting go, sometimes when we're not ready to let go of stuff, it will cause us to find ourselves in a place of desolation or death when we're not ready to let go. Whether that is we're emotionally dead or strained, we're financially in a place of not growing because we're not ready to let go of a certain situation. And so we talked about those things and how we correlated Pharaoh's not being able to let go, how it caused death for his army. And so we have to be very careful when we're not ready to let go, that we don't allow the thing that we're holding on to kill us in some type of way, whether that be physically, emotionally, or spiritually. Those were some of the things that we talked about. We also talked about how this chapter, when God brought them out of Exodus, he began to give them revelation from God in the means of laws and instructions in regards to worship. And so whenever God brings us out of something, he wants to give us a standard in which we can live by, so we won't find ourselves repeatedly in bondage. And so when we're in situations in our own personal life, we always have to go back to the standard, and that standard is God's word, and allow God's word to give us the instruction and things that we need in order to keep us from constantly being in a place of bondage. And so those are some of the things we talked about. I hope that this recap wasn't too long. There were a lot of other things that we talked about as well, but I can't give it all to you in a recap. So you'll have to be willing to join us next time, or free up your schedule so that you're able to get online with us and go with us in this journey as we look through this book of Exodus and find out what God is saying to us in this time as we are exiting 2020 and headed for greater things in 2021. So be blessed. Until next time, I will see you later. And I hope that this recap has been a blessing to you. Bye.